It's halfway through 2020 and one word has dominated most of the year, with politicians spouting out things from confusing guidelines to hypocrisies to the downright absurd. It turns out history is indeed proving a useful resource to find out what happened during historical pandemics. Most notably is the Black Death, lasting from around 1346 to 1352, which decimated communities from Asia to Europe to North Africa. So let's revisit this time to discover what we're in for. To discover some tips on how to get through this. Rumours of deadly disease spread from Asia faster than the disease itself. When a trade ship turned up in Sicily with its crew either dead or about to follow, it was clear it had finally hit Europe. Families were left with the devastating choice to either die with an afflicted loved one or leave them alone to save themselves. The clothes, possessions and whole houses of the departed might have been burnt in an attempt to contain the plague. Of course, let's not forget the cutting-edge medieval science employed to fight this virus, tackle the plague. Astrologers charted the skies and determined the planet and star patterns responsible for such suffering, which is all well and good, but it didn't really help the immediate problem of overflowing mass graves. The people who did were the plague doctors who donned their primitive PPE and went out to diagnose and treat the infected with their essential equipment of a mask full of flowers and a long stick. Wait, stop. What is that? The goggles? The funny hat? The beak? Yeah, here in the 14th century, we don't know any of that. The plague doctor's costume was not conceived until the 1630s. Its inventor is often credited as the French doctor Charles Delorme. The idea was that the body was protected from contagious contact, the stick could evaluate a patient with a socially distanced prod, and the beak would store herbs that would cleanse dangerous bad smells that were the core of the miasma theory of disease. But back in the 1340s, miasma theory was much less developed, and no one was treating the sick while cosplaying as a Rito. Plague was so widespread and deadly that no one really had any idea what it was or how to treat it. They tried some bloodletting to balance the four humours according to Roman physician Galen's millennia-old theory. But when up to 60% of the population started dying off, people resorted to some good old-fashioned scapegoating. It was God's punishment of the sinners of the world, so time to start self-flagellating. It was the Jews poisoning the Christians, so time to ramp up some anti-Semitic persecution. It was all because of the cats, so time to kill the kitties. Fast forward to the 17th century and we haven't seen a case of the plague on the same scale since. There have been many smaller outbreaks across many cities, like in London in 1592, 1620 and 1665. And while they killed tens of thousands, we're not talking half the population this time. This is when we see the plague doctors, who were people contracted by cities specifically to treat plague victims, but realistically their main job was to count the deaths and deal with the corpses. And these were the ones wearing the beak masks and terrifying ordinary people like the Grim Reaper turning up on their doorstep. Well, not really. Just because we know Charles Delorme might have proposed the outfit and outlined its protective benefits does not mean it was in widespread use across the 17th century. The only source I found seriously considering the outfits used is Genevan physician Jean-Jacques Monget's Trait de la Peste, which outlines contemporary knowledge of the plague and details various remedies. The front piece is an engraving of the plague doctor costume that the text dates to an outbreak in the Netherlands in 1637. Monget's book was published in 1721, nearly a century after the outbreak this costume was reportedly in use for. The year 1721 is important to consider. The year before, 1720, was the last major outbreak of the plague in Europe. There were many publications around that time that remembered previous outbreaks, how deadly they were, and how they were dealt with. A treatise of pestilence by an eminent physician talked about the 1665 London outbreak. Another 1721 publication republished texts relating to previous plagues, like the Mayor of London's instructions to citizens in 1665, a mortality report of various English outbreaks since 1592, and an account of the 1665 outbreak in Italy. They were using past instances of the plague to help them comprehend and navigate the current plague. Sound familiar? Sources that are actually from the time of these 17th century outbreaks seem to make fun of the plague doctor's costume instead of legitimizing it as a standard apparel. A 1650s wood engraving by Paulus I is one of the key visual sources used today to demonstrate the existence of the plague doctor, but it's actually a satirical drawing. The title translates as Dr. Beak of Rome. The doctor's stick features an hourglass and bat wings, which can only be there as a comedic element rather than any practical purpose. In the corner, a plague doctor brandishes his stick towards some people who are running away. presumably to the plague-stricken town. The plague doctor's costume may well have been used in Italy during the 1650s, but when word of the outfit travelled further west, people thought it was absurd. Notice this is a German source commenting on Italian plague practices. They might not have even seen the outfit themselves. So what's the point of knowing all this? You could say this is my way to educate the ignorant masses and call out many a YouTube video that shows Dr. Beak when they're really talking about the medieval Black Death. But I'm a believer that nitpicking historical inaccuracies is less interesting than thinking about how these ideas and images are used by people today. The plague doctor has become something of a symbol of historical disease. This is what scholars might describe as the iconography of plague, or the semiotics of how past diseases are conceptualized in the modern public consciousness. The Venice Carnival traditionally has a procession of people wearing a bastardized version of the plague doctor mask, which became ironic this February as the area became the European epicenter. We can buy Halloween costumes of the outfit in the same way we might dress up as a skeleton or a zombie. Today, the Plague Doctor isn't really about the Black Death or about the Great Plague of London or about any historical disease really. What it does is symbolise a world without modern medicine or understanding of disease. It's how we think about a world without antibiotics and without sanitisation, when people were left to watch half the population literally drop dead, when people knew there was little they could do about the horrors devastating their community besides taking some medicinal herbs and, if all else fails, tying a chicken to their buboes. To me, I understand the Plague Doctor's costume as the bridge between early modern theories of disease and 19th century germ theory. I get defensive when people say it was a useless manifestation of an idiotic theory, because they were sort of on the right lines with the bad smells and avoiding touching their patients, and it must have had some sort of positive effect when treating something so contagious. This is why I might roll my eyes when the Plague Doctor features as a malapropism during discussions of the medieval Black Death. But really, I have to ignore all of that, because that isn't how the Plague Doctor image is used today. I think at its core it is an image that reminds us of historical suffering and how so very lucky we are today to live with our modern understanding of science, with the amazing people that look after those who fall ill. And just like people during the 1720 outbreak, we're thinking about past instances of illness to help us process our current situation. I do think we need to stay critical to make sure we're on the right path, but I know if I'm going to experience a pandemic in my lifetime, I would much rather it be in 2020 than any other century that has come before.